So we just got done talking about The Pearl of Great Price. This one's actually from 1959. This one's called The Art of Dying. This was one of my favorite lectures for a long time. I still think when it comes to the law, I find it to be great because he touches on the feeling of doubt. And many times if you read Neville, he's very big on daring to assume. And he kind of just doesn't really care about doubt. And as somebody who was very doubt-ridden, I felt like I needed some addressing on it. And I feel like this lecture addressed the feeling that I had. And so he starts the lecture out by saying that Paul in Scripture says that he dies daily. And Blake said that death is the best thing in life. There is nothing in life like death, but people take such a long time in dying. At least their neighbors never see them rise from the grave. And obviously these people aren't talking about physical death. They're talking about the death and resurrection inside of oneself, inside the imagination. That's what they're addressing. And so you are something inside of yourself. Can you die to it? Can you cease to be it and be something else? You'll see how it's actually an act of forgiveness. Because if you are something you dislike, the fact that you can die to it and it actually cease to be inside of you and you become something else, it's freedom. It's actually freedom. There's no little reserve. There's no, well, what if I still am that thing? No, you completely it ceases to be. And, I'll quote him. He says, "So I see my dream and I must learn to die to what I am in order to live to what I want to be." And he kind of hints at what he means by, sort of letting go and dying to what you are. He goes, "I do not wait for signs to appear. It is when I'm most aware of my restrictions and feel the pressures. Then I must learn to die. I must learn to let go of what my senses dictate and go mad, quote unquote, and yield to what is only a dream." And I remember reading that and it just, it really hit me because when he says, "I don't wait for signs to appear, and it is when I'm most aware of my restrictions and the pressures, that is when I change. That's when I die to what I am, and I resurrect to what I want to be." And I remember that hit me because when you're going through life and you feel these restrictions, you feel the pressures coming upon you, you almost feel like you don't know who to turn to or where to turn to. You don't really know what to do. And he says, "You must let go of what my senses dictate and yield to what is only a dream." And yielding is a sense of surrender. So you really want to let go of what is happening outside. And really, when you see the dream inside of you, you want to yield into it. There's going to be some resistance within you that's going to wonder, well, what if it doesn't work? And he speaks about that. He says, if you feel within yourself, well, what if it doesn't work? What if I yield and nothing happens? He goes, that is when you have to completely let go and give yourself to this dream. And then he goes on to say, "If I could yield myself to a dream and it would not become flesh, it would be complete tyranny over this wonderful concept of life, but it cannot fail you if you yield." So life would be terrible if our dreams could not become flesh, but they can. And he says that, and this is where he talks about the doubt. He says, what if you imagine and you tell yourself, what if I play this my last card and it doesn't work? He goes, then you have not yielded. You have not nailed yourself to this idea. And so it's that feeling of, I always had that in the back of my mind. Well, what if I imagine this? What if I go all out and believe in myself to be that and nothing happens? And he's saying, then you haven't yielded. There shouldn't be any more questions when you yield. When you really give yourself to this dream, then you will become it. It won't fail you. You will actually become the thing if you give yourself to it. If you die to what you are, and you resurrect and attach yourself to what you want to be, you will become that thing. You have to. And so there must be complete abandonment to what I am, to what I want to be. I have to let go of what I've always been, what I've always known myself as, what I've been called my whole life. I have to let go of it entirely. Abandon that once was a reality to me. Die to it and resurrect a new reality by changing myself. He says, but man is afraid. He does not dare to abandon himself, so he never dies. And Blake would say he would just go mad. He called it madness. He would just completely let go of what his senses dictate and believe in what he wanted to be. And anytime I've made progress in my life the way I wanted to, I always was slightly afraid to let go, but I didn't really die. I always felt like afraid to give up what I am. But anytime I actually abandoned myself to what I wanted to be, I left myself into a dream within myself. It never failed me. But I never let go of that fear. It was always there. And even though it might have worked at times, I still had this little, well, what if doesn't work this time? It was always there. But it's the same method. It is letting go of what you are to what you want to be. Can I let go of this? Can I die to it? Or am I going to remain afraid? Am I going to remain scared to be it? Am I going to remain in the insecurity that I am in? Or am I willing to give it up for security? Even though it's a dream, am I willing to give it up for a dream? And then he says, I try to catch the feeling that would be mine if I were the man I wanted to be. But that involves death. He goes, but if I'm not in love with what I am tied to, I must yield to something more lovely and make it real. So it's a constant, you become something, and then you are that thing for a while, and then you want to outgrow it. You might outgrow the clothes as you would outgrow clothes. And you have to yield into a new article of consciousness, a new state of consciousness. You outgrew the one you're in. And many times people who come and talk to me, they don't realize that they're actually in a state of consciousness that they've outgrown a long time ago, but they think that they have to keep wearing it. And I tell them, you wouldn't be talking to me this way unless you actually within you wanted to leave this state. But again, man's afraid, scared of changing their state of mind because it involves them to yield to something new, because it's always going to be that way. You're always going to feel this slight fear of changing because you're used to being what you are. But then you have this other conflict within you that you know you've outgrown it. It's uncomfortable. The pants and shirts are too tight now. I've outgrown this, and yet I still wear it because it's the shirt I've always worn. It's the state of consciousness that I know myself as. Well, know yourself as something new. Can you know yourself as something new? And if you can imagine yourself, if you can conceive of yourself as something new, can you abandon what you are now for it? And if you can't, then make it lovelier. Make it something more lovely. And so we abandon ourselves to dreams as if they were true. That is what we do. We abandon ourselves to the unseen realities within us. We see them, but it's just unseen by mortal eye. But if we don't yield, if we don't become the thing, that conception of yourself that you have it remains there. It doesn't disappear. It just remains an unoccupied state. Unless we yield to it, it just remains unoccupied. And then he goes on to claim that this is forgiveness. This is a sense of forgiveness. And that's I remember when I first read this, the first couple of paragraphs, I felt that feeling of like, oh yeah, this is a sense of forgiveness. Because it is. When you completely die to what you are and you change yourself, it's forgiveness in the true sense of the form. And again, the feeling of the pressures, the feeling of in times of trouble. And I know that I've been there. And it's when those times where you feel those pressures coming upon you, when you feel like you need something to work, that is when you yield to it. I don't leave myself in that desperate, intense feeling of, I need this to work. I yield to it already working. Even though everything feels on the outside, it looks like it's not. In spite of that, do I have the necessary faithfulness to remain loyal to it, as we said in Counting the Cost? You see how this all ties together. Will I buy this pearl? Will I buy the dream? And the cost of this dream is for me to yield to it. And, he says, don't think you are greedy because you are demanding for things to change. He always speaks about that. Don't feel selfish. Don't feel greedy. Don't feel guilty for changing yourself. No matter what it is, you yield to it. Always remember the yielding part. It's the thing that has saved me many times. Whenever you've wondered how or when, and you become frightened, or you feel the pressures and you feel like you can't overcome these pressures, that's when you yield. That's the moment you yield to it. And it's always going to be a yielding. And I will say this forever because I just know it to be true. Because I've seen it work for me and I've seen it work for other people. You have all these questions and you have all these reasons as to why not. All these doubts, but can you yield? Can you let go? And when you yield to it, you create it. You have to remember that. When I yield to it, I will create it. There's no reserves. No, well, I'm playing my last card. What if it doesn't work? None of that. That all goes away the moment you yield. And some people are afraid. They can't yield because they're afraid of many reasons. They're afraid of letting go of their doubt. They're afraid of going mad. They're afraid of falling into a state of insanity. They're afraid of it not working. All these reasons. And so they never yield to it. They see it within them, but it's like when I was a kid, I got in trouble in detention, and I had to stand and watch everybody play at recess, and I had to stand there and watch. I wasn't allowed to play. It was right in front of me, but I just wasn't allowed to touch those monkey bars in a sense. And so it was distant, but it was right there. And that's how it feels when you don't yield, when you don't let go. It feels like you look at the dream within you and it just remains and you observe it. But you observe it as if you're an outsider, not a participant. You're not participating in it. And when you start to participate, in order to truly participate in the dreams within you, to become those things, you have to yield. And that's what he equates dying is the same as yielding. No more questions. You just let go entirely. Can I let go of what I am? Really let go. Even if it doesn't make sense to me, can I let go and become the thing I want to be? These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. But again, I'm going to end this one here. And this one's called The Art of Dying by Neville in 1959. I'll put I don't know. I'll look for the link for this one because he has another one called The Art of Dying, but I think that one's in 1964. So he has two of them, but I like this one from 1959. This is my favorite one, but I would recommend you read it, get more of an understanding. These are just my thoughts on it. But again, thank you guys for listening.